Hi, this is Paul. Obviously, the big news this week was Jordan Peterson's video where he announced he's home, he's back, he's working on stuff, he intends to do some things. And whereas many of us were expecting something about Exodus in terms of a new biblical series, or at least hoping for it, he announced Proverbs, which I thought was a very interesting announcement. And having now had a couple of days to think about it, I thought I'd make a little video on why Proverbs is a good fit for Jordan Peterson's biblical series. When Jordan Peterson is at his best, why the biblical series is anti-decadent, Jordan Peterson's approach to the Bible, the need for ancient wisdom in a world of hyper change, and the nature of the Book of Proverbs. So let's jump in. Let's start with this question. What's really at the core of Jordan Peterson's work, his wave? And I think it's the rescue of the individual. Mass media tended to focus on and drew, I think, Jordan Peterson into a more political, cultural food fight. And I think that was a real issue in the later stages of the first wave. I think its most profound and long-term impact was in the lives of individuals trying to live better lives. And at least in terms of the side of his work that I've focused on, that's been far more interest and I think of far more enduring value. And I think about Parker Palmer's great quote, "The place God calls you is the place where your deep gladness," and I think in some ways Jordan Peterson's deep sadness, "and the world's deep hunger meet." And I immediately thought about this interview that he had done in on a radio.
I read a fascinating interview with you, and you were talking about the plight of young men and how guys really need to get their act together. You went on to say the lack of an identifiable and compelling path forward and the denialism these kids are being fed on a daily basis and undoubtedly destroying them, and that is especially true of the young men. This show we've covered widely the fact that suicide is the biggest killer of young men under the age of 45 in this country. It goes on in that interview to say, at this point, to my astonishment, Peterson begins to weep.
Yeah, well, it says, see, now it did it to me again. Look, last night, I was at this talk I gave, and about 1,000 people came, and about 500 of them stayed afterwards, and most of them were young men, and just one of them after the other comes up to me, and they shake my hand, and they say, look, I've been listening to what you've been saying for 6 months, and it's changed my life. It's like I was depressed, I was addicted to drugs, my relationships weren't working out, I was hopeless, I didn't have any goal. I started cleaning up my room and telling the truth and working hard on myself, and it's really working, and I just want to thank you for helping me. And I think, God, it's so sad that so many of these men, they've not had an encouraging bloody word, a real encouraging word in their entire life. It just takes a little bit of encouragement and care so that they're willing to set themselves straight to some degree and start trying. It's just a catastrophe that's so rare in their lives. And so, yeah, well, every time, because I see the same thing when I'm talking. My audiences are often composed mostly of men between, say, 20 and 35. Not exactly young, but young enough. And they're desperate for a discussion about responsibility and fair play and noble being and working properly in the world, and the idea, and to hear the idea that their lives actually matter, that if they straighten themselves up and fly right, that they'll have a beneficial effect on themselves and their family and the community, and that the world is starving for that. And for them as individuals, not for them as a group, but for each of them as individuals. So, yeah, it breaks me up. Every time the topic comes up, it breaks me up because it's so damn sad. And we're so stupid. We're alienating young men. We're telling them that they're patriarchal oppressors and denizens of rape culture and tyrants in waiting, and we fail to discriminate between their competence and their tyranny. And it's awful. It's so destructive. It's so unnecessary. And it's so sad. And so whenever I think about it, especially because of all that I've seen of it, it makes me sad, like deeply. It's so sad.
Why has it happened?
Oh, God, that's a complicated question. I mean, well, it's partly happened because every culture has a tyrannical element, I mean, our culture isn't perfect. There is oppressive elements to it. It's not completely fair. So some of it is just the age-old observation that you don't get a culture without a bit of a tyranny. A lot of it is resentment and failure to take responsibility. You know, it's people saying, instead of looking at the part they play in making the world a dark and terrible place, they blame something like the patriarchy and then assume that all the men who compose it are somehow malevolent tyrants or tyrants in waiting. It's like it's ideological possession. There's just no excuse for it. It's motivated by resentment.
Does
mostly.
feminism have a role to play in that?
Well, it depends on how you define feminism. If it's the feminism that says, wouldn't it be lovely if women could offer what they have to the world so that the world would be a better place on the same footings as men? Well, no, that's great. If it's the feminism that says that Western culture is an evil, corrupt patriarchy, then absolutely. There's no excuse for that sort of thing. And it completely dominates the universities, especially in the humanities. Like, we really believe, most left-wing academics believe that the Western culture is a corrupt patriarchal tyranny. I mean, God, wake up. Most governments in the world are run by thugs, absolute thugs. They'll kick in your door and kill you in your sleep. In the West, we have, well, a wonderful civilization. People are as free as they've ever been. You can live well here as an individual. And to consider that, you know, a corrupt patriarchal tyranny, and to lay that at the feet of young men, and then to tell them that they have to be discriminated against because of the systemic, let's say, racism and misogyny of the past. It's appalling. And men are bailing out of universities at a rate. This is not my opinion. I've been tracking these statistics for 15 years. Men are bailing out of universities at a rate you just would not believe. There won't be a man left in the humanities in 15 years at this rate. All you have to do is look at the trends. It's quite obvious, and it's no wonder. So, and it's just appalling. And I've also been described as misogynist because, you know, I've been trying to strengthen young men. It's like, of all the ridiculous ideas, that strengthening young men is somehow misogynist. I mean, God, I can't even believe what you would have to think that that was a good idea.
I think in many ways that interview pretty much gets to the heart of Jordan's heart, what he wants to do, what he's passionate about. And the Book of Proverbs is right here. Tim Keller, who is a retired preacher now of Redeemer Presbyterian Church, did a lot in the Book of Proverbs, which I remember when I was listening to him about 15 years ago or so. You know, I sometimes wondered why so much in the Book of Proverbs, but considering his ministry context, considering what he was doing in New York City, I can very much understand why Proverbs. Proverbs in the Old Testament and the Hebrew Scriptures is basically a training manual for young men. That's essentially what the Book of Proverbs is about. And so, you know, after Jordan announced it, I thought, that's interesting, but you know, thinking fast and slow thinking is usually better thinking. After a couple days, some of these thoughts bubbled up. Now, on my channel, a number of times I've complained about what I call the decadence of the book tour. Jordan, after his book really took off, he signed on with an agency and did an unbelievable amount of events in, you know, the pace at which that book tour went. And it wasn't really a book tour. It was sort of a Jordan Peterson evangelistic crusade. But if the center of his work and his helpfulness is really the rescue of the individual and quite often of men, the book tour, I think, eventually became something of a distraction. And I appreciate the fact that Jordan recorded a lot of those lectures, and some of those recordings he's been using on his podcast, and they've gone out. But I haven't found those. I mean, basically what he would do on his book tour is he would get up and he'd have something he was thinking about. I shouldn't complain too much. In some ways, it's a lot like my YouTube channel. And he would basically talk for an hour or so on that subject. Now, what do I mean by decadence? Well, I read Douthat's recent book, which I thought was excellent, and decadence is sort of a decaying of a living thing, and that's I think some of the initial passion and excitement and energy of Jordan before the book really came out. The book came out in January of 2018. And as that book tour wore on, and obviously his health, his wife's health, he just got ground down. But there were a couple other elements to it as well. Dave Rubin would open a lot of these things, and I went to 3 of them, basically, and a couple of other of his other events. And Dave Rubin would almost always open it up in a way that I found distasteful, partly because I've seen churches operate in that same way. Dave Rubin would kind of get up there and, I think we're winning, and it would be the tribal focus, us against them, and that would get the crowd going. And Dave Rubin has sort of become more, he's working much more in the political culture war space, and I think that, again, I don't find that to be, at least for me, and obviously maybe I'm just a huge minority in this, but I think probably those of you who watch my channel are here because we're seeing it in the same way, that this isn't the most interesting part of Jordan's work. So Dave Rubin and the culture war framing, life on the road, living things create new from what is outside of them. And so part of what's true about human beings is that we're, in and of ourselves, we're really too shallow a pond to sustain ourselves. We have to work from outside. And so there is an anti-decadence in living religion, both religion S and religion W. Decadence is a big problem in churches and preaching. It's a big problem in churches and preaching. It's a big problem in Christian ministry because, as I mentioned in the video I just did about Brett Weinstein and his video with Heather Heying, and I still want to do a full commentary video on that video. What tends to happen in churches and in life is you find something that works and you keep going to the well. And, there's a saying in Hollywood, you jump the shark. You just keep going to the well. And you see this with sitcoms. The first season has a fresh idea, some good writing, some interesting characters, but it's making money. And so what do the producers do? Go back, keep doing it, keep doing it. And in one hand, Jordan's book tour brought him and expanded his audience, and I think was successful in that sense. But as he noted in the video when he came back, his audience has continued to grow. And I think not because of the culture war stuff necessarily, but more because of, I think, his basic helpfulness in, again, I think in that core BBC 5 radio show, you got more to the core and where the culture war elements connect up to the rescue of the individual elements. But as I said, in churches and ministry, the decadence is a huge problem. You just keep going back to it. And so you find that churches get enormously repetitive and enormously insular and very little creativity. In fact, creativity is beaten out of the church because there's the fear that, you will stray from the path. And that's a legitimate fear. But part of what keeps church renewed is the ongoing creativity. And part of the reason that theology is a living discipline is because the culture keeps changing and you have to keep adapting the story. And part of the secret of Christianity's success is, in fact, its adaptability, how Christianity has been able, more than I think any other world religion, to jump ethnic and cultural groups and be adapted. Now, what that means is the threat of the signal-to-noise ratio in Christianity is a constant issue, but it has proven to be dynamic and creative and yet enduring. Martin Luther took from St. Augustine in curvitas in si, that we are curved in on ourself. And so what you really need to avoid decadence, and I should be preaching to myself here, my channel is decadent in its own ways, is we need things from outside. Yesterday I haven't been doing a lot of just open rando conversations lately. And I got some emails from people. I can't find a slot. So I opened up more slots and they filled up right away. And I did a couple of conversations, one of which I know I'll post for sure. And we'll see if the other will give me permission to post. And it's totally fine if he doesn't want to. Many of the conversations remain private, and appropriately so. But our desires and our drives lead us to feed off ourselves, and we keep going back to the same thing, and the well gets dry, and suddenly we hallow the well and sanctify the well, and it's a dry well, and so we get curved in on ourselves, and so I'm really happy that part of the reason that I think biblical preaching has endured and the use of the Bible in preaching has been so important is because going back to the Bible and the discipline that creates actually keeps, it's sort of an anti-decadent practice within Christianity to keep going back to the Bible and keep reading it afresh and keep reading it anew, but not just, oh, how does the Bible strike me? Oh, what do I think of that? That can get decadent just as well. But to go back to the living root and do the hard work, whether it's more of a symbolic literary practice of interpretation or a grammatical historical practice, all of those things tend to refresh the reader and the preacher and keep us feeding from outside and helping healthy growth continue to happen. Living things take from other organic material to create more life. And I think that's why Jordan Peterson's most important and refreshing work often came from his biblical lectures. Now, we should talk about Jordan and the Bible, and this gets into his idea of Darwinian truth, which was very often attacked by new atheists and those in that community. Why? Because in some ways, new atheism is hyper-modernity, and as, again, Dr. Jim said, modernity that was fleeting, modernity that is decaying. And so in some ways, new atheism itself is a decadent discipline because they keep going back to the well. And what Jordan has with his insight into Darwinian truth is actually a broader understanding of what we mean by this word. John Vervaeke, of course, has his 4 P's of knowledge: perspectival, participatory, procedural, and propositional. Hey, I got all 4 just off the top of my head. I'm making progress. And go back to Vervaeke's work to look at those things, and you can find some of that stuff on the Bridges of Meaning Discord. And what Jordan Peterson gets at with his Darwinian truth is, I think he notices the decadence and the limitations of defining truth merely propositionally. And there's participatory, there's perspectival, there's procedural, there's these other, when we use this word truth and it's built into the word, it's far broader just than this correlation in a world of objects. Remember, Jordan Peterson begins Maps of Meaning with that primary distinction that says, part of the power of modernity was to take and you can get this in his transliminal interviews, which were before the wave, and those are actually some of the best interviews he did. So Jordan Peterson begins, and again, this is old stuff for him. You can conceive of the world as a form for action or a world of objects. Now, there are objects in the world, but part of why I think Jordan is anticipating the next, like I said in the last video, he's sort of got skinned knees feeling his way through the cave, saying we need some light from the past to give us information of what's ahead, is that modernity created so much of its power by closing the eye of the manifest image and looking out through the scientific image. And basically eliminate the pattern seer from the patterns that he is seeing. And again, back to this illustration, part of what happened as science progressed is that we realized that this camera can't see anything, that this camera, in fact, needs what human beings, as Jordan Peterson had talked about with Sam Harris in his Vancouver lectures, human beings need an a priori structure in order to actually be able to see. Because what needs to happen in seeing is that there needs to be a map in here of the world out there so that new information that comes in can be mapped onto the world. All right. So truth as propositional truth there's very much correspondence. And so modernity basically closes one eye, eliminates the subject, and say we're going to see the world as if it's a world of objects. Okay. As if it's a world of objects. And it's a very powerful move. It's a very powerful tool. But in modern decadence, we forget that we ourselves are patterns seeing patterns, as Jonathan Pichot so rightly said. And so what Peterson, and there's actually, if you go through Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, one of the more helpful videos that I thought in that series was Vervaeke and the relationship between relevance realization and Darwin. And I think in some ways that begins to get at what Jordan Peterson talks about with his Darwinian truth. Now, Darwinian truth is sort of an equal opportunity offender because you just have to say the word Darwin and Christians get hives. And then if you play around at all with and are at all, let's say, recalibrating the propositional aspect of truth, then modernists get hives. And so, yeah, Jordan comes out with this, and, Rationality Rules is going to attack him, and Christians are going to, oh, yeah, this is why we don't trust Jordan Peterson. Darwin! So, but what's really happening here is, as Jordan Peterson had said many times, I'm actually integrating some of the insights from the pragmatists. And Jordan very much identifies with the American pragmatist school of knowledge. And, Vervaeke's got some, I think appropriate critiques of that school. But most of these schools, if they take off or have any prominence that they do, there are usually reasons for it. And so what other kinds of truths out there besides the propositional truth, where you're basically correlating to a world of objects, you're correlating to the physical world. And so now we have, in a sense, we've got the cell phone stand, which is, a metaphor for this way of seeing truth. And then we have the, this is why I can't give it to my wife to use because I'm using it in my office, even though it's not doing anything, because the camera can't see. The camera can't see anything. So Jordan Peterson, in his Darwinian truth, talks about truth in action. Truth in action is that which perpetuates life and creates a future. Now, it's only active, living beings that can actually interact productively, rationally with the world of objects. And this is what the pragmatists saw, and this is what Jordan is seeing. And you can see this by asking a couple of simple questions. When you use the word true with the question, let's say, is my spouse or partner true? Well, what are you saying? Now, I just did a conversation, I thought a really good conversation with a guy named Joe, and I'm going to post that on my channel, where I get into this question because, he was raised Christian, gave up certain elements of the faith, found Jordan Peterson, is still pretty much sort of in the atheist camp, but he's watching my videos and listening to Vervaeke's videos. So he's doing his work. And, I made the point that, why is the sex act so paradigmatic of the question of whether a partner is true? You have to think about that. And I related it to why the question of Jesus' resurrection is so foundational to the truth of Christianity. It's because certain actions in the physical space are so meaningful and consequential, they basically energize all the layers. And so a question like, is my partner is true? A partner can be untrue in a whole variety of ways, completely apart from, let's say, sexual infidelity in marriage. A partner can be untrue by having a dismissive attitude. A partner can be untrue by their use of money. A partner can be untrue by the way they talk about their spouse. When we're talking about true there is an element of correlation out in the physical world, but most of it is procedural, participatory, and perspectival. All right. And so true has layers beyond the propositional. And what Jordan is trying to do with this idea of truth is to engage this. And I'm actually trying one of the things I need to be working on, and I'm just lately making too many Jordan Peterson videos again because he just came on the scene and I'm too interested in all these other things. But it very much feeds into my church work, because when you ask the question, is the Bible true? Well, it's exactly this issue that gets engaged. And I think this is part of the reason that Jordan was found to be so helpful across the spectrum with so many Christians, at least those who could, put a little calamine lotion on what they break out in when someone says the word Darwin. So, and Jordan gets at this with his comment, is your aim true? There's an element of correspondence there, the correspondence in time space between the arrow and the target. But Jordan is making the point that sometimes even just aiming at something, even just dragging that heavy cross up the hill to the city of God, even just aiming something recalibrates the world and creates a world which has meaning and purpose and intentionality and direction. And he says this is basically built into our entire civilization. And, I was I almost did a little short video so I listened to Brett and Heather's number 50, and then I listened to their question and answer in that. And they almost always get questions because sort of Brett Weinstein's shtick is this, evolutionary truth. Okay. And so what we keep hearing is this, well, we're maladapted. And what does that mean? Well, we're maladapted. Let's say we're so fixated on sugar and fat that our feeding sensors are maladapted to this new environment rich, this food environment, fat and sugar rich context where we have soda and fast food and all of these things going on. Okay. Well, in what way is adaptation true? And again, this is where, if you go back to John Vervaeke's lecture in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis on Darwin, when John was talking about relevance realization and Darwin, lights came on for me. And lights came on for me that I think connected up with Jordan Peterson's Darwinian truth, that it isn't just this correspondence element of truth, it's this much fuller 4P world in which we live in where true comes in. And this gets, better at the word reliable. Fittedness or fitness isn't merely a thing correspondence. And I think that's, that insight that John Vervaeke has, if you kind of, I really hope that John and Jordan can have, again, so all of this is premised on a few things, some of which I'll get to towards the end of the video. But John and Jordan, John and Jordan had two significant public conversations, one of which is on video, and it's well worth watching. And I'll probably go back and rewatch it after this, because the longer, again, thinking fast and slow, the longer I live with both of their thought, the more I continue to explore it, the more I can see, okay, this is where they're different. This is where they're the same. But again, it's the difference and the same that actually makes the interaction fruitful and interesting and relevant. And so hopefully at some point we can see John and Jordan get together, because Jordan knows, something of John's work, and John knows a fair amount of Jordan's work, and they certainly have a lot of overlap. And so I really hope that, and if they want someone to translate in between them, I volunteer, and we can throw Peugeot. My dream is to actually do something with Jordan and John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot, and to do all of those things together, because I think the three of them, John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau, are some of the most helpful contributors to the conversation that are helping us move forward. So I think Jordan Peterson's Darwinian truth is key to how he made the Bible, how he refreshed the Bible, how Jordan Peterson plus the Bible really brought new insight into a whole group of people, myself included. Now, if you can understand Jordan Peterson's Darwinian truth, you can understand why the Bible continues to be relevant and continues to offer authority in a world where not just we're looking for correspondence ideas from the Bible, but we're looking for reliable guidance from the Bible. And Nassim Taleb is a very interesting guy. Most of you are probably more familiar with his work than I am. I've dabbled in some of his books. I haven't given him a lot of attention on the channel. But Taleb is a very interesting thinker because he's all about anti-fragile, and he's all about chaos, and he's all about risk management in the financial sector. And he did this talk at Google where he made a point that I really want to bring in here, because I think it's key. It's key to understanding why Jordan has had the impact that he has.
So, if you want to write something that can be read 20 years from now, or hope to be read 20 years from now, make sure it could be read by someone 20 years ago. So project yourself backward in time. It's much easier than go forward. Had someone read the book in 1960, 1980, would he or she have, would it have been interested in the message, in the treatment? Yes, no. If yes, that's exactly how you do it. So it's basically backwards. People who think that they have to be technological for the work to survive, it's the exact opposite. By the Lindy effect. Simple logic. And effectively, if you want to predict the future, you can't predict what new will happen. Nobody predicted Google. Okay, your grandparents didn't think that you guys would be wearing gym clothes and with the dog-friendly things, delivering sushi for free. Okay, and cappuccino, actually very good cappuccino. I mean, I remember when I first came to New York how it tasted. So your grandparents didn't predict that. You cannot predict, but you can predict something, which is that what is recent would be replaced by something more recent. So it's easier to predict that what is fragile can break, and what is, by the Lindy effect. So it has for some domains. It doesn't work for all domains. So now that I spoke about literatures, good enough. So now we can move to skin in the game. Okay,
and that's Taleb's point there, which is there's a wisdom in what Peterson is doing here, in that, well, his most enduring work is probably going to be, is biblical work. Why? If you base it on this, you can't know the future because things are going to change, and this is the way things go. So if you look in the past and you look longer in the past, you should have a better idea of the future. And I think that's really the key to why Peterson and the Bible are a good match. People keep focusing on the maladaptation of the old. Our food desires are formed in a context of sugar and fat scarcity. And so, well, that in some ways that proves the impact. And so all of Brett Weinstein's talk about, all this maladaptation. Yeah, but what that also says is that we are going to build fast food, and we are going to refine sugarcane, and we are going, in other words, if you look at what's most constant, and if that's where your focus is if that's what you're paying your attention to, you will probably be able to understand better and deal with all of the changes that come at you. And so what we're looking to do is, so you look to the very old in hopes of enduring, and you look to the enduring to find wisdom in how to endure. Now, I've spoken a lot about this in my videos recently, but basically the shtick, and a bunch of people have pointed me to the Distributus recent video, how atheism, new atheism is boring, and I've seen about 20 minutes of it so far and really enjoying it. But the part of the and I think this is a great example of new things that don't endure. New atheism is already, its shelf life is already there. It's been in decline for a while. It's grabbed prominence on YouTube, but its presence on YouTube far outstrips its presence out in the world. And by this point, of course, the celebrity atheist shtick of debunking is quite well known. God is a super thing. You're not actually dealing with the God of the Bible. You're dealing with God as super thing. And again, in all fairness to the new atheists, it's because Christians sort of reduced God into a super thing. And that's deism, God number one, God number two. We've got a lot to talk about that. So God is a super thing. Knowledge is truth bites, and so it's a world of object, and so God is a super thing, so God is one more thing, and that's why it's a flying spaghetti monster or a teacup around Mars, something like that. God is a thing out in the universe, and the whole thing, can we find that thing? Do we have reason to believe that that thing is out there? And again, as I've said, it's sort of like Gandalf and Sauron debating the existence of Tolkien. Can you find Tolkien in Middle-earth? Is there a place in Middle-earth where Tolkien isn't? Now, again, I get this illustration actually from Tim Keller, who picks it up from Dorothy Sayers, who was a contemporary of Lewis and Tolkien, and a novelist, a very prominent novelist and mystery writer. And she actually at one point wrote herself into the story because she really wanted a relationship with one of the characters that had developed. And you might say, well, that sounds kind of strange, but it gets into the idea here. Again, knowledge is truth bites. Truth is primarily understood as correspondence in a world of objects. It's a very static vision of the world. The super thing sends down privileged, and actually there's a fair amount of correlation to Gnosticism in this move. The super thing sends down privileged Gnostic truth bites. And so then what Sam Harris says is, well, this is what revelation is. And so when I read the Bible, I'm not finding these privileged Gnostic truth bites. In fact, I find and this was again one of the big changes after the Cold War into the post-Cold War era. We don't really have a new name for it yet, but that was one of the moves that they continued to make. As well, I read in the Bible, I find slavery, and of course, and I find all sorts of problems in terms of geology and all of these issues. And so certainly an all-powerful super thing could have written a better book. That's essentially Sam Harris's move. But in terms of what is he talking about? Well, he's looking for new insider information. And this tends to, again, be the assumption within the scientific frame that what science finds are new things or the relationship between things in the world. And again, as Jonathan Peugeot, I think, so presciently articulated, but we are patterns seeing patterns. And what does that have to do with the pattern? That's basically a really shorthand way of talking about the crisis in philosophy that Thomas Nagel and others basically said, okay, we've gotten to the end of what we can do like this. Now we have to open both eyes and they have to be integrated. Wilfrid Sellers, Daniel Bonavac, lots of videos out there on that. But again, it's important to recognize what is happening with the new atheists with respect to this. The super thing sends down privileged Gnostic truth bites, and I'm unimpressed by the Gnostic truth bites that the super thing has placed in the book. Okay, but if you see this through the eyes of Taleb and Jordan Peterson's Darwinian truth, it's a very different perspective. And so Sam Harris will complain, the Bible is old, truth bites, maladapted, immoral, etc. That's basically their shtick. And Jordan comes along, and again, it's now, well, God number one. Well, what is God number one? And again, I played it in a couple of my videos now, so I don't need to play it now. At the end of the unbelievable conversation with Susan Blackmore, the very end of the video, the last question, Jordan Peterson basically lays out his from below, scientific, speaking as a psychologist idea of what God is. It's the thing at the top of your basically of your salience hierarchy. It's the thing that is your God for you. And, what struck me when I first heard Jordan talking like this was very much what I had been taught growing up in Dutch Reformed circles about presuppositionalism. Your God is, in a sense, the sum of your presuppositions. Now, obviously, in Dutch Calvinism, at least the moderately conservative brand that I am, you've got God number one and God number two active. And as the Christian Reformed Church continues to get pulled apart by the evangelical versus mainline culture war tugs, that's in crisis. But what sort of knowledge do you need for adaptation? Now, obviously, truth bites have their place. You need to know where things are in time and space. You need to be informed of a world of objects. But what information do you need to get through the cornfield? What information do you need to get through the cornfield? Well, a lot of calls this morning. What information do you need to get through the cornfield? Relevance realization. Well, what does that mean? Well, you're certainly going to need propositional truth. I mean, what is corn? Where are the stalks? Are there dragons in the cornfield? So and so. But the world is way too large for you to basically imagine you get all the information in the cornfield. You don't live long enough to get all that information. You can't process it. But getting through the cornfield is something that should just take a matter of minutes or maybe hours, depending on if you live in Iowa. Well, how are you going to get through the cornfield? Well, relevance. Well, I need a marker. Maybe there's a mountain or a tree or a signpost or something out there that I can orient myself so I can navigate. Now we're getting into, is the aim true? Because we're trying to navigate. We're trying to get from A to B. Now part of why the whole question, is your partner true? Why this is important is, well, okay, so your partner's having sex with someone else. Well, how does that impact anything? Well, today, as sex continues to have different places in terms of our mental economy, what is that important? Well, probably if someone else is having sex with your partner, and from there it just expands. Are they going to have a child with your partner? Are they going to draw your partner away from you? Are your partner's resources no longer going to be available to you? Again, I've been reading a whole bunch of 18th century history, and it's part of why I bring up this illustration, because in that world, well, it was framed basically, you have a spouse and you have a mistress. And, women have their own options in that complex landscape, but it's relevance realization. And you ask, well, how are these objects in the world and their relationship to one another relevant to me, a pattern seeing other patterns, relevant to me, an actor trying to make the way through the world? And so Talim basically says, we can't look forward, so you have to look past. And the further back you can look, the better you'll see the patterns. And if you understand those patterns better, you'll probably, odds are, have a better chance looking forward. And that's Peterson's genius with respect to the Bible, because he looks at the Bible and says, what we have in the Bible and in other religions, but what we have in the Bible are all these old patterns that accumulated to create a civilization that I value and am in fear of its being lost. And so I think we need to go back and look at those patterns and continue to apply those to figure out how to navigate our way into the cornfield in the future. There's Jordan Peterson right there. That's the nugget of what he's trying to do. And again, individuals rise and fall on these patterns. And one of the ways to talk about that is wisdom. All right? Because wisdom is not just knowledge and, again, information, but wisdom says, how can I take the truth bites, the propositional truths, the perspectival truths, the procedural truths, the participatory truths, how can I integrate those in my world so that I can act with excellence and success? And again, if you look at Jordan Peterson talking on that radio interview, he's saying, people are not having success, and particularly young men, and I'm trying to help young men. Is that bigoted to try to help young men? I'm happy to help young women too. Helped young women all throughout my career, but men are in trouble, and I want to help men, because if men don't do well, women don't do well. Same as if women don't do well, men don't do well. We need each other. So in terms of the economy of the world, it's just fine to have some people focusing on women and some people focusing on men. But as my wife, who is a grade school teacher, has said, I've seen a ton of emphasis on girls and women and not much on men. And so, as we go through, we're always trying to get those balances right. And so old interactivity is vital. And that's why looking at the old patterns, and so that's when Jordan Peterson talks about, let's say, Cain and Abel. And that story has been refined and refined and refined and refined. And the stuff of the Bible, all these books behind me are biblical commentaries, have been chewed and chewed and chewed and chewed and chewed. It's an excellent place to look behind us. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't look at other religious traditions? No, and Jordan says that's true. But because I am a Westerner, because I've been bathed in this, because this is my civilization, this is my primary focus. That's what he's saying. And what he affords in his lectures is really credibility of the Bible to our context. Jordan Peterson found wisdom encoded in the mythos of these stories that correspond to the enduring patterns in the world and in human beings, speaking psychologically. And again, if you go back and watch his first 15 lectures, he keeps coming back to that because he keeps trying to emphasize, I'm doing this from the ground up. I'm doing this from, I'm resisting exactly what Sam Harris is afraid of, which is the super thing and Gnostic insider information coming down. I'm resisting all of that. I'm looking at the Bible from below, and I'm finding it credible, and I'm finding information that actually corresponds in sort of the truth bite way to the world. And so Sam Harris simply dismisses it, and Jordan looks at it and says, no, I think there's more, Sam. I think there's more, Sam. I think there's more there, Sam, than you're giving it credit. Then you're giving credit to it. And a lot of people obviously listened and began to agree. He says people for centuries have found it helpful, and it created Western civilization, and so we should keep working it. Now, if you understand anything of God number one, what Jordan Peterson understands God to be, the Bible then is the Word of God. Well, what do you mean word? It's the Logos. And I know I've got Skip ringing in my list. What about Eros? And yeah, Eros is important too. Logos and Eros. And I understand where Skip is coming from. But Jordan Peterson, complains that Jordan is too logocentric, doesn't balance it with Eros. That's sort of an insider Jungian debate that I would maybe someday Skip will get a chance to have a conversation with Jordan about this and get to hash out some of their stuff, which would be fine. But so celebrity atheists look for correspondence truth bites that don't seem to fit Gnostic disclosures of the super thing. That's one way to articulate celebrity atheism. What Jordan says, well, the Bible is the Word of God. It's the Logos of God. Well, what is God? Well, there's both kind of an individual God, and then there's a God number one that's sort of built into the world. And the patterns of God, you can look at the patterns of God by looking at the Logos. So all of these patterns now distilled into Logos, distilled into words. And of course, Jesus is the Word of God. The Bible is the Word of God. I did a video on this. I have 3 YouTube channels. I've got my church channel. I've got this personal channel that you're watching this one on. And then I've got the Vanderclips channel, which is, a channel for shorter stuff, things I find that I want to distill and just, well, here's something 5 to 15 minutes instead of 1 to 2 hours, which dominates this channel. So Jordan Peterson looks for navigational wisdom that has endured in the guess that it will keep enduring even in times of chaos and change. And this is why Jordan Peterson is anti-fragile. And this is why the Bible is the word of, let's say, the Word of God number one for Jordan Peterson. Now, why is the Book of Proverbs so helpful in this? Well, here's a little evangelical book if you want to get a tour of the Bible, how to read the Bible book by book. And both Douglas Fee, Gordon Fee, and Douglas Stewart are competent evangelical scholars, and you can find books like this across the church range. But I picked this book because I know it, and it's I think accessible to most of my audience. And so this is their introduction to the Book of Proverbs. The larger part of the Book of Proverbs is made up of 6 collections of proverbs or aphorisms, that is, wisdom sayings, mostly couplets, two-liners that offer guidance to the young, and predominantly young men, although their value is by no means limited to any age group or gender group, on how to live morally and beneficially in the world. On either side of these collections is a prologue of several poems in chapters 1 through 9 that stress the importance of listening to the sages, and an epilogue of one poem, chapter 31, very famous one, that idealizes a wife who is characterized by wisdom. A preamble, chapter 1 through 7, sets forth the book's title, purpose, and theme. The groupings of proverbs and aphorisms are all identified within the book itself. The Proverbs of Solomon, Sayings of the Wise, second book, Proverbs of Solomon 2, Sayings of Agur, Sayings of Lemuel. All of these are intended to be read and studied in light of the prologue. And this is where this particular book shows its evangelical quality. Its emphasis on the need to attain wisdom and to reject folly, to walk in righteousness and shun evil. Here you also find the book's fundamental theological perspective. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, I intend to follow Jordan Peterson's Proverbs series, and these authors are right here. Well, how on earth do we think about that in the modern frame? That's my interest. It's these kinds of questions that brought me to Jordan Peterson, and watching his skill and his wisdom in working with the side of it I knew less well, which is science. And so this is how he's helped me. So what does it mean to fear the Lord? Now, the Lord is clearly God number 1 and God number 2 together. What does it mean to fear the Lord? Respect, awe. It's not afraid. It's if you're making your way through the jungle, you should fear the lion. Now, maybe at some points it would be actually be afraid of the lion or the tiger, but it might mean consider the tiger when you're making your way through the jungles of the subcontinent, because the tiger is something to be feared. And so the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So take all of this into account when you're navigating your way through. Now, wisdom in the Bible, chokmah, is not just, we tend to think of wisdom as sort of esoteric, disembodied, but the Hebrews were not disembodied at all. And so Solomon, when the Bible talks about Solomon, for example, as being so wise, they mean that in many ways he's successful. All right, and that success would be manifest. So look at someone like Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb has been successful on Wall Street. In biblical terms, that would be called wisdom. In other words, he's reading the universe, he's reading the room, he's reading the patterns, he's anticipating it in practice and in knowledge and in action. That is wisdom, okay, in the biblical sense. And that's why Jordan, in focusing on Proverbs, I think is dead on, because when I listen to what Jordan wants for young men, it's this kind of wisdom. Clean your room, find a wife, make your marriage work, fix your relationships with your family, get a job, succeed in your job, succeed in the world, change your world for the better. Proverbs is just dead on here with what Jordan is trying to do. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And this is a good example of these Hebrew couplets. And this is typical in Hebrew poetry. And these couplets are really ingenious, because sometimes the couplets are, you're saying the same thing twice, giving two different facets of that thing. Sometimes they're contrastive, where you say it one way, but then you say it the other way. And so these couplets are really, sort of all these dualities in the world. These couplets sort of allow you to play with these dualities and perspectives. And so again, I'll be very interested to see how much of this Peterson gets into. Even though many of the Proverbs are common to other cultures, and there are there are writings from other cultures in the Book of Proverbs. It's an accumulation of wisdom, and the Hebrews understand that we don't have a monopoly on wisdom. We can learn from other cultures. So even though there are many Proverbs are common from other cultures, they are especially tailored for life in the covenant community of Israel. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. They presuppose not only the covenant law, indeed, to fear Yahweh is to hate evil, and also the life of the people of God in their promised land. And so I'll be very curious to see the way Jordan tackles this book. Now, I have not done much with the book in my ministry, partly because the very form of the book is so difficult to tackle. And, Tim Keller actually has used the book quite a bit, and maybe I should take a lesson from him that, but it's a difficult book to tackle because, again, it's a collection of aphorisms. And unlike narrative, where you've got this long narrative, and what narratives lend themselves to is lessons and summaries and axioms and observations and, the point of the narrative. Narrative just does that well. Aphorisms are just sort of boom, 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 boom. And so then when you have a collection of them, it's okay, where's the pattern? And so you can have these little couplets. They have all their own little patterns. So it's actually a pretty difficult book, I think, as compared to a lot of the narrative in Scripture in terms of preaching and teaching. The Bible Project has a couple of excellent videos on it. And again, they emphasize, excellence, success. This is biblical wisdom. But now, where again I think this is key for Jordan Peterson is, again, speaking psychologically, Jordan basically follows the modernist script in terms of how he presents himself and says, okay, so sort of the modernist truths that it finds with religion S is, secularity in the public space, religion S in the private space. And so when Jordan is giving his biblical lectures, he's in some ways very modernist in saying, this is the public space. I'm going to speak from general revelation. And again, that's key to the Book of Proverbs. It's not special revelation. Now, there's an element, that's part of why I wanted to talk to the debunking thing of God number two and the super thing and insider information and wisdoms. That's that the Bible certainly has that. But what's so helpful with Jordan Peterson is, I think, the corrective reframing of God number one and God number two, understanding Jesus as the Word of God that brings order into a chaotic world, the prologue of John, the beginning of Genesis. This is, I think, part of why Jordan was so effective for many, many people in terms of opening up the Bible again, because I think Jordan sort of rebalanced this in his presentation, because just as Jordan looks at the world and says things are sort of unbalanced, I think Christianity sort of got unbalanced in terms of God number one and God number two, partly because of deism. So biblical wisdom is built on general revelation. It's from below. It's things that are publicly accessible. Okay, it's accessible to all. It's very much not Gnostic-y insider information. Anybody can see these patterns. Corresponds well with Jordan Peterson's God number one, from the bottom approach. Questions I have going forward in this. Can he pull it off? It's one thing, and I know this as well as anybody, it's one thing to announce you're going to try and do something. Doing it is hard. And health will be his number one thing. From what I've seen from Jordan, he likes to work flat out. Is he going to have the stamina he had even just 5 years ago? His health picture is, he's had COVID. The benzos have not helped his mood stability. And again, this is all public knowledge. I have no insider information, no insider Gnostic-y information, but just looking him at on the video, he looks a little fragile. And so take your time, Dr. Peterson. Get healthy, get strong. We very much want to see you in this space again. Expectations are going to be higher on the technical end for him now. We've had a couple of years to chew on his biblical series and to see its strengths and its shortcomings. All of our work has strengths and shortcomings. Lots more people are going to be watching from the start. And part of the decadence, but also comfort of the book tour was there's mostly people in the room. And he did so much of it, it's hard to critique. So this new biblical series is going to add focus, so we'll see. Can he pull it off? I don't know. Will he stick to Toronto, or will he take a show on the road? I don't know. If it works out better for him in terms of his health and his family to stay in Toronto, by all means, do it from Toronto. Hire out a theater, or do it just on YouTube while we're in COVID. One of the things, I know John Vervaeke, he had, a certain degree of support, technical support for awakening from the meaning crisis. And the technical support was really helped because he had videoed some stuff before and there were sound issues. And Jordan obviously has the resources and the reach to get help. But during COVID, how does that work? So he announced it. How long are we going to have to wait for this? Will it come out at all? I don't know. Will he stick to Toronto? Will he take it on the road? Whatever. Just get it out on YouTube, Jordan. That's all I ask. Or maybe he'll use ThinkSpot, which, again, hasn't as a platform. That might be a way for him to sort of energize that platform. Who knows? Maybe I hope he doesn't put it behind a paywall. Maybe it'll be freemium, disclosed to Patreon. I modeled my channel in some way after Jordan's, in that I have never monetized my videos. At my meetup, they said, you should monetize one or two. It'd be kind of interesting to see how that would go, and there's some temptation to that. But I liked Jordan's sort of open source approach. And I hope he sticks with that. Will it be fresh again? Now, a lot of you are Jordan Peterson fans, as am I, but I listen to his critics as well. Not the culture war critics, but more of the long-term colleagues and students who have had a chance to look at his work for decades. Remember, this was 1999. Some complain that Jordan has, in a sense, a manner that makes it appear that he's thinking out loud, but he's basically been thinking the same thoughts since 1999, and he really hasn't come out with anything new. It's been new to us, and, he blessed the world through that, but is it really new? And now with the illness, you see, the illness can go both ways, because it could be that his latest journey to the underworld will produce new insights and knowledge and wisdom. And so it's a good question. We'll have to see. The times are different than they were before. I mean, he rose October 2016. It's now October 2020. Donald Trump is running for president again. Donald Trump was unknown territory in October. Donald Trump as president was unknown territory in October 2016. Donald Trump is now pretty well mapped. Jordan Peterson was quite unknown to most of us in October 2016. He's pretty much mapped. Will there be a second wave? We don't know the future. We look back on the patterns and we say, Jordan's got a considerable track record here. Let's see what happens. Challenges. He started something before, but did he build anything? And again, part of the reason I started my channel was I could basically look at the positive impacts Jordan was having on me, and I looked around and saw a considerable positive impact on a lot of other people. And I knew, as a pastor, you can preach a great sermon. Someone can join your church, but it's over the long haul that the deeper, profounder changes happen. And so people don't just need some inspiration, they need a track to follow. And I think 12 Rules was helpful in terms of giving people a track. But part of the reasons I started meetups were not meetup.com. It's not my invention. Although $80 for 6 months, it's a moneymaker. Part of the reason I started Jordan Peterson meetups were, well, other people were doing it obviously too, and part of the reason I did it in the context of a church was there needs to be stability. There needs to be repetition. There needs to be a track to run on. And so that's part of the reason that my channel has taken the shape it has. It's part of the reason we started the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. It's part of the reason we've done all of this. Another common criticism, in fact, of Jordan by some of the individuals that have known him for a long time that I've spoken with is he's a lone ranger. He doesn't attribute enough of his work to other living people. I think he does some of that. He's not, so his daughter introduces the podcast. You almost always get the sense from Jordan, it's a family business. Okay, I'm Christian Reformed. We know all about keeping it in the family. The Christian Reformed Church is like one big extended family of Dutch immigrants. That's breaking down. But so I get that, and you love your daughter. That's clear, and I don't have any complaints against Michaela, but I think if his program of helping individuals is going to achieve its potential, he's going to have to develop teams. He had a relationship with a business school or something like that, and there were some early on there were some complaints that, they oversold Jordan. And some of the grifting criticisms have been, Jordan's going to make all kinds of money off this. Now, I have absolutely zero problem with Jordan making millions off his book and off his tour and off his speaking engagements, and I think that is the way the modern economy works, and that's actually the way to get your stuff out there. And I think Jordan has also been enormously generous with his time. I've seen that again and again, and I've heard that also from people who are up close and with him. And I've seen that with many, many people, individuals who have known Jordan for a long time. And so this charge that he's a grifter, I think is just an ignorant insult. Nothing that I've seen in Jordan leads me to believe that. I think he is sincere and genuine in what he's been doing, but I think key to having a long-term, key to the full development of his vision of rescuing and helping individuals will be building a team and building an organization. That's really difficult. He's got the resources. He's got the reach. It's difficult to do because when you're leading an organization, you have to be more careful with your speech. And you have to be more disciplined in some way. And you're sacrificing certain kinds of potential for other kinds of long-term potential. And so will he develop a team? Will he develop a track? How will he work with collaborators? And I think from June of 2019 to now October of 2020, his absence because of health speaks to this. Now, someone who might look at what I'm doing with Estuary might complain that I'm following a similar path. And it's probably a fair criticism. And part of what I've wanted to do with Estuary is inspire people to do some things. I do not have a lot of excitement about administration, nor do I feel myself tremendously gifted in it. And so if Jordan basically looks at this and says, I want to help start things, I'm not looking to build things, fair enough. Fair enough. And in some ways, part of the reason and part of what I've done with my channel has been to sort of voluntarily come around to, Jordan was sort of leaving ministry on the table. And so, hey, I want to talk to people who have been energized by him. And I want to give them some tracks to follow. And so that's sort of been my channel. And so, yeah, what will come? Will it be new? Does Jordan basically have one thing that he does and does it well? Does it astoundingly and dramatically well enough that the man met his moment, had a big splash? And I guess that's the question of whether or not there'll be a second wave. And only time will tell. So, again, to summarize, I think Proverbs is a good fit. And I think it's a good fit because I think biblical series is when Jordan's at his best for all the reasons I talked about. I think the biblical series will be anti-decadent in a deep way that will really help Jordan. I walked through his approach to the Bible. I think it's really a helpful. I think it's rejuvenated. It's rejuvenated me. It's given me new things to pursue. I think the need for ancient wisdom in a world of hyper change, he and Nassim Taleb, they're dead on right with that. And the nature of the Proverbs, the Book of Proverbs, just lends itself to Jordan Peterson's efforts. So, again, if you, I don't do this much. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, there's Patreon. You can support my local church. They pay the bulk of my salary. There are lots of ways to support this channel. Get involved. Go over to Bridges of Meaning Discord, and you can find the link to that below. If you're interested in starting an estuary group or a Jordan Peterson meetup or something like this, find the video that I just had about estuary leadership development with John Van Donk. They can, Job on the channel, in the Bridges of Meaning Discord, they can point you to John, and I can point you to John. So, yeah, I'm excited about this new opportunity, this new prospects, and we'll see what comes. Thanks for watching. As Vervaeke says, it's a great line. Thank you for your time and attention.